On this episode of Extreme Off-Road, oh, wait, that's not my show. That's better. Welcome back to another informative video brought to you by Doomsday Diesel. In this video, I'll be going over in great detail several things related to the OM617 injection pumps. Not necessarily in this order, but will include removal and installation of the pump, modification, who modifies the pumps and the options they offer, how they'd like you to ship the pumps to them, and the differences in the pumps themselves. Go ahead and check out the description below where I'll add a timestamp so you can navigate through this video easier. And with that, let's get started. Now I first want to address, before I get into the rest of this video, why I'm making this video. It's because I get tons of questions from customers and not customers about the pump modifications, what they are, where you can go to have them performed, and where I think you should send them. And I just want to make things crystal clear for everyone that I can in this video. Hopefully it will answer your questions that you have. That way it'll save me some phone time. It'll save dieselmeken some phone time. Hopefully that makes sense and answers your questions for why I, Joe, at Doomsday Diesel, am making this video when I really don't do anything with these pumps other than install them for customers. So let's talk about injection pump options for the OM617. Now there's a naturally aspirated OM617, and then came the turbocharged version later on. We're only talking about the turbocharged version. You'll see it referred to as the OM617A. Now there were two injection pump options for the OM617A. Mainly the MW pump. This is the only option that you can get in the US. Overseas they had an M pump option, but it was uncommon. You may see people claim that they have an M pump in the US. If they do, it's been imported because, again, it was not an option on cars sold in the US. So let's talk about the differences here. The big difference that you'll notice is this external ALDA that dieselmeken modifies when they build one of these pumps. It's a little easier to adjust than the MW ALDA. Other than that, not a lot of differences between the two. Same fuel output, same power potential, and that leads us into the modification of the pumps. So let's dive into that. As of right now, at the making of this video, there are 4 options for getting your pump modified for your OM617. There's Mina, who's, to my knowledge, a pioneer in this venture. There's Diesel Pump UK, there is dieselmeken, and there's Bensforce. I endorse dieselmeken. They have the most refined product and they stand behind their work. So let's dive deeper into modification options for the pumps. And we'll start with the M pump. The M pump is becoming very scarce. As I mentioned earlier, they were not a common option for the OM617A, and now there's even less of them. It's a 30, 40-year-old piece of technology. They're not making these, so they are becoming quite difficult to locate. Because of that, dieselmeken will gladly build your core, if you have one, that you can send them, but basically don't plan on having them find one for you, because it could be 6 months till they find one. The MW pump, as I mentioned earlier, has the same modification, same output. There's no reason to not go with this. These are readily available and they are everywhere. So with that being said, we will set this aside, and that'll be it for this video as far as the M pump goes. Now as far as the MW pump goes, These things are a hot item right now, with the OM617 swaps being so popular in the US. And lastly, in terms of power and numbers, because that's what everyone wants, is horsepower numbers. A stock pump will net about 80 to 85 horse at the wheels. If you had just the dieselmeken modification performed, you should see between 140 to 145 horse at the wheels. That's with the stock turbo. If you upgrade the turbo, get everything tuned right, you should be able to net a daily drivable and reliable 220 horse at the wheels. Now, I've seen dynos well over 300 horsepower with these. Supposedly these will even support over 400 horsepower, but sadly the engine doesn't handle much more than 220 horse at the wheels reliably for a long period of time. As far as boost goes, about 35 psi from what I've seen in failures and dynos appears to be the absolute max that I would ever run. To add some safety factor and some longevity into the life of your engine, I recommend that you don't run any more than 30 psi boost. And again, you get full fuel at 22 psi. So that pretty much wraps everything up for the modifications of the pump performance-wise. We can hit on the idle adjustment. There's a jam nut and an adjustment stud. It's a threaded stud. It's got a flathead screw on the top here, and then there's a jam nut. It takes a 14 millimeter long socket. You loosen the jam nut, and then you can move this, and that adjusts where the throttle rests at. Here's an up close shot of the external idle adjustment with the flathead screw and your jam nut. Then there's a spring up inside this rod, so when you're pushing on the stop lever, it moves this arm and actually pushes up on that spring, and that's what cuts the fuel off. You can adjust the idle here externally on the MW. It's actually recommended you do it that way. dieselmeken has informed me that if you adjust the idle internally, there may be other adjustments that have to go along with it, at which point you won't be able to keep everything within calibration. So it's much safer to adjust the idle externally. Now let's talk about actual modifications that you can do to the pump or you can have done to the pump. First and foremost, on a stock pump, you can remove the ALDA. I have a video on how you do that. I'll explain here the benefits of doing so. There's a boost reference on here that sees the boost pressure from the intake manifold. As you get more boost pressure, it increases the amount of available fuel. By removing this, you have full fuel on demand, right off idle. It's great if you do a lot of city driving or off-road driving. You won't see any gains in max power levels because it's only right off idle. You would have full fuel at full boost if you're on the highway. That's why you don't see any differences. The way it would change your dyno graph is it would smooth out the curve a little bit or flatten it out instead of going up abruptly. It will put out a lot of black smoke. If you mash your foot into the throttle, that is not the point of the modification. It is to get more fuel, to get you moving quicker and easier, and a lot of people claim that it helps spool the turbo a little easier because you feed it more fuel right off the bat. Now, if you're going to send the pump in to have the 7.5 millimeter modification done, you have to send them an ALDA because there's so much fuel with the new elements and plungers. It's not drivable without the ALDA on there. So if you send the pump in to dieselmeken, Force, they will modify the elements and plungers, recalibrate it. At that point, you go from about 50 cc's of fuel maximum to about 90, so not quite double. The ALDA at that point gives full fuel at 1.5 bar or roughly 22 psi of boost pressure. So keep that in mind when you're matching your turbo and you're tuning your wastegate and your boost settings. You won't see full fuel until the ALDA has 22 pounds of boost or 1.5 bar pushing against it, and at that point you should have approximately 90 cc's of fuel. Removal of the injection pump when the engine is out of the vehicle is actually super simple. One thing I like to do before I pull the injection pump, get my 27mm socket, breaker bar, come down here, rotate the engine to where I want to time it when I reinstall the pump, and make sure that we're at before top dead center by ensuring the cam lobes on the first two cam lobes are both pointing up. Those weren't necessarily pointing up, but you got to make sure they're both pointing up, or you could be 180 degrees off, which means you would go one more revolution to be right before top dead center. You'll need a handful of wrenches, including 10mm, 12mm, 13mm, 17mm, and I like to use this style of wrench for the injector lines, which is also 17mm, but it fits around so that you can actually get the wrench on each one and actually get a fair amount of rotation on each one. This is more handy when you go to tighten it to reinstall it, but these are all 17mm. This guy back here, 17mm. You want to turn it with the bigger head, otherwise you risk just threading this part out. This line right here, oddball. You don't usually get your 12mm out, but you will for this one. On the lift pump, there are 3 nuts, and this would be something you could wait to do until after you had the pump pulled out of the car, but there's 3 nuts, 10mm. You can't get the closed end part of the wrench on the nut, you can only get your open end part on there. This line here feeds into the lift pump, so that will come off. That line comes off, this line comes off. You pulled these off, so that's all the lines. And remember, you're going to keep all these banjo fittings. Don't send those with the pump. I've already gone ahead, removed the ALDA and the transmission module. Other thing you'll have to do, which I've already done, is remove your oil filter housing or your relocation block, whatever. This has to be bare so that you can slide the pump back. Then we'll take our 13mm, we'll loosen this bolt back here. Then we have 3 nuts on the front that we have to remove. There's one there. There's one right here. And there's one right there. So you loosen the bolt on the back, the 3 nuts on the front. This whole thing slides out, and that's it. So let's talk about shipping the pump. Once you have the pump removed from the engine, first thing you want to do is drain all the fluids out of it, all the diesel, all the oil. The biggest problem that dieselmeken face with shipping of these pumps is fluids not being drained out. And I know from experience, when customer ships something, UPS or whatever it may be, if UPS sees oil or any fluid leaking out of a package, they stop it right there. And a lot of times it can actually get thrown away. So if you don't remove all the oil out of the pump and you package it poorly and it leaks even a drip, you might find that your pump gets thrown in the trash. So make sure it's drained. Also make sure it's insured for the proper amount. I would recommend at least $500 for a core that you're sending in to be modified. Because you have to think about it. If your pump is damaged or UPS loses it, they're going to give you the insurance money, but you're going to have to find another pump with that money. It's not like they're going to magically give you another pump. So make sure you insure it for the amount that it's going to take for you to source another core. So moving on from that, you don't have to have it sterile, clean enough to eat off of. They do an excellent job of washing this pump. It looks like new when you get it. You are going to want to remove every fitting. So you can see on here, I have a red plug here, but I have a banjo bolt here. Anywhere you have these banjo bolts and these crush washers, do not send those with the pump. The lift pump with the primer pump in it down here, that comes out. Just plug that hole with a rag or something suitable. And then on the back side, there's actually a check valve that threads in on the back side. That check valve basically looks like it has two different heads on it. This separates, there's a spring and a ball in there. If you send this in, I believe they will inspect it for you. If not, I've been told that you want to inspect it, take it apart, make sure the seat for the ball has not been scratched, make sure it's not discolored, and make sure the fitting itself seats correctly. But other than that, you want to remove all these type of banjo fittings that the Cohline lines attach to. Remove the lift pump, and then there's a collar on the end of the pump. It goes over the spline shaft. Do not send the collar. If you send these parts, they don't need them. It's hard for them to keep track of who sent what. So it's definitely strongly asked of you to not send the parts they don't need. And when it comes to the ALDA and the transmission shift module, you could actually remove those, pack them separately on the side of the pump. When you have UPS drop a box and it drops it on the ALDA or the shifting module, they get damaged. They don't make new ALDAs and they don't make rebuild kits for them. So it's a lot safer if you just remove them, pack them up on the side. Additionally, there's an external idle adjustment on this pump. There's a cast tab that comes out of the case. A lot of times this thing gets rust seized and people get too vigorous trying to loosen that up and adjust it, and they end up cracking that tab and or breaking it completely off the case. If that happens, your pump case is totaled. They cannot build it for you. If you send it to them, they will probably send it back to you. If you break it off, you'll have to go find another pump, whether you find just the case or a whole pump. But I would not recommend touching that. I have sent these pumps in, they work their magic, they get penetrating oil on there, they always come back looking nice and clean. Sometimes if the parts have to be refreshed, they'll refresh them, but you can be assured when you get it back, everything will be freed up. You'll be able to adjust it without the fear of breaking that off. If you've modified your pump, or someone before you has, or in other words, they've removed the cover on the back and turned it up, you may not be able to have your pump modified. This pump requires a sophisticated test bench to calibrate it anytime anything's adjusted. So if someone's gone in there and modified things to the point they can't even find their way back to stock, it's not guaranteed they'll be able to modify your pump for you. So they ask that you don't send pumps in if you've messed with that or hacked it up. Additionally, a common modification that I highly discourage you from partaking in is removing the rack traveler limiter. The rack travel limiter will cause basically overfueling at low RPM or at idle. So they will not modify your pump for you if you've removed your rack limiter, thrown it out. Now, if you've removed it and you held on to it, it's going to be up to you to communicate with them to see if they'll modify your pump. So that is a huge example of why you shouldn't mess with your pump. If you want to get more power out of your pump, just go ahead and send it in. So, once you get everything disassembled, you get the pieces taken off the top, you're ready to pack it up. Pack it very, very carefully. A lot of these, I've been told, have come in damaged, and the shipper or the customer doesn't insure them. They're basically out the pump at that point. Lots of bubble wrap, lots of paper. Don't use the large air bubbles that you get with Amazon. Don't use those, they pop. Use lots of paper, lots of small bubble wrap, and you should be safe. If you're going to communicate with dieselmeken, they prefer email. It's super easy to get distracted with all the phone calls that they get. If you watch dieselmeken's YouTube videos, most of them have the phone ringing in the background. So they just ask that you email them. They get back to you usually within a day. And if you really have to sit down and talk, they will talk with you on the phone, but they do ask that you email them. And lastly, we'll hit on pricing real quick. I'm not going to say any prices in the video because prices obviously always change. I will put some rough ballparks in the description, so if you're curious and you want to look real quick, you can see what things sort of cost. Nothing is finite. I have nothing to do with their pricing. I'm just explaining this pump modification process to you as a favor to them. Best thing to do, hop on their website or email them and you can get a firm quote. No matter what OM617 you come across, whether it's a 100,000 mile engine or a 400,000 mile engine, it's very likely going to have worn out fuel and oil lines going to and from the injection pump and the fuel filter. You'll oftentimes see band-aid fixes like tiny little hose clamps trying to hold these hard to find lines on the banjo fittings. Truth is, it's super simple to replace these lines. You don't need expensive pre-made lines from Mercedes or the online parts suppliers. The line is called Cohline line. It's available at bellmetric.com. There's two different sizes of line. There's a larger and smaller. There you can see Cohline, made in Germany, and a set of lines runs about 20 or 30 bucks. So we're going to dive into how you go about installing the banjo fittings onto the new line so that we can have all new lines for our new injection pump. Making the lines is actually pretty simple. There's only a couple tools you need besides the line itself. A pen to mark the length, a nice sharp utility knife, and a heat gun, and possibly a tape measure. And a good pair of leather gloves doesn't ever hurt either. First thing we'll do, we'll start with this line. This is probably the easiest one out of them all because it doesn't ever change. First thing we'll do is take a note of the orientation of the banjo fittings. Now, the faces at each end, the mating face is parallel. So this one's really easy. We don't have to clock one end in relation to the other because this Cohline line is super stiff. So you're not going to easily be able to twist it without making it want to kink or loosen up a banjo fitting on one side or the other. So you want to make sure that your length is exactly as long as it needs to be, but not any longer, and obviously not any shorter because then it wouldn't fit. Now I've gone ahead and held my line up and marked the length, but I won't cut my new line yet. I'll make sure I get the first fitting installed. That way if I booger that end up and I have to cut the line and start over, I don't have about 12 inches of wasted line. I'd only waste about a ½ inch. When you go to put the fitting in your vise, you want to hold it firmly, but you don't want to crush the circular part in and bring it out of round into an oval shape, because then you'll have problems sealing and you'll have problems getting your bolts in. So the best way I've found to remove these without risking damaging the banjo fitting is to actually just heat it up until it pulls off. If you have to cut it with the utility knife, you risk putting a slot in the actual barb part of the fitting, which could give the fuel a trail to leak out past the fitting. So I like to concentrate my heat more so on the banjo fitting. It pulls right off once it gets warm enough. If you heat the line up, it'll actually just neck down and it'll break off, and it'll leave the fitting with that much line still on it. The next thing we'll do, we will have our new line handy in one hand. I'll take a heat gun and I will heat this fitting to the point that when I shove the line over the fitting, it will heat the line up and let it deform, because this is a really hard plastic. You can see how thick it is. Now the trick behind heating the fitting instead of the line, if you heat the line and you go to start pushing on it and it's hot all the way to right here, you're pushing on it, it'll actually bend over and put a big nasty kink where it bends, and then it'll end up breaking and leaking there. So if we heat the fitting instead, then we can push the line with all the force we want to, because the line is cold and rigid. Only the part that's touching the fitting is hot at the very tip. Now when you're heating up this banjo fitting, keep in mind you can get it too hot and you can actually burn the zinc off. I don't really mind leaving a little oil or diesel in it, because once it starts smoking, then I have a pretty good indication that it's warm enough to put my line on. So I'm wearing a TIG welding glove. It gives me enough dexterity to grab and feel the line, but it's going to keep my fingers safe. So now that we are hot enough to put our line on, I'm going to grab the line as close as I can, and that'll prevent buckling the line by holding it too far back. So this part's critical. So as soon as you get the fitting and the hose mated, I like to take a cool wet cloth with water and basically cool everything down, because should the fitting be so hot that you have the weight of the line pulling down, those barbs can actually basically cut through the inside of the hose just with the heat of the fitting. So the next thing we'll do, now that we have our fitting successfully installed, is we'll make a clean straight cut through our new line. And we'll flip this around and do the other one. We have to make sure our fittings are parallel when we put the second fitting on. That part is critical. If you screw that up, you will be making a new line and probably throw this line in the trash. And there you have it. New line with your original banjo fittings. Should last you hundreds of thousands of miles and many years. While we're going through the process of replacing the pump and the fuel lines, we'll do the filter as well. So first I'll show you some tips and tricks for the stock filter head, and then we'll dive in to the installation of the fuel filter adapter that I sell. So one of the most common problems with the OEM filter setup is that the bolt that the filter actually threads to likes to leak through this top portion. And so there's actually two different styles of this bolt. There's an older style that has one O-ring, and it uses a crush washer between the bolt head and the filter head. Now, a common mistake is that people get that mixed up with this newer style. The newer style has two O-rings and no crush washer between the bolt head. There's just no crush washer, period. The problem is places like Pelican Parts don't openly advertise the O-rings being for this bolt. You have to know what the part numbers are, so I'll give them to you here. There's one, there's the other. Simple, cheap O-rings cost you a couple bucks. Some other places want to sit here and charge you ridiculous amounts trying to claim that they're some special type of O-ring or something. But as you can see here, these O-rings have basically worn out to the point that they're square. They're not round, and so they're not sealing. This will drop right in and out. So once we replace these, our sealing issues should all go away. Now that we've got our new O-rings installed, we will move on to installing our fuel filter adapter. So start by pushing this back in here, and it should be a snug fit because that O-ring, if it's doing its job, is sealing the fuel from coming out the top. So should kind of pop in. Then we'll get our fuel filter adapter piece. We'll set our filter head up, take some Loctite. They actually make a specific Loctite for sealing threads. I'll put a link for that in the bottom. Get our Loctite on there. We will thread this guy on. And we do want this to be tight all the way up to the top. So once you get that tight all the way to the top, the fuel filter will thread up these threads and an O-ring will seat against this face. And that will keep everything sealed, and then that lower O-ring on the bottom of the bolt that we just installed will keep fuel from going up past the threads. So you don't have to be super concerned about sealing this threaded adapter up to the top here. If fuel gets in there, that O-ring will stop it. And that's all there is to installing the fuel filter adapter. If you're running a Donaldson fuel filter, you might have to just lightly grind off basically these two edges on the outside here to get the OD to clear, because that filter is so much larger in the OD. Caterpillar seems to thread right on though. The most convenient way to prep the pump before putting it in the engine is to go ahead and install the lift pump outside the truck. There's a hard to reach nut on the top, two on the bottom. You can only reach them with an open-ended wrench. It's much easier just to do this on the bench before sticking this on the engine in the truck. With the MW pump, when you go to install it, you want to install it about 22 to 24 degrees before top dead center. 24 degrees is stock on the OM617. With a stock pump, the common adjustment is to advance the timing to 26 degrees before top dead center. Once you have the 7.5 millimeter modification performed, 24 is going to be the absolute max that you're going to want to run. The more worn out your engine is, the less timing you'll be able to run. So if you have a worn out engine with 24 degrees of timing, it's going to nail a lot more than an engine in good working condition. A lot of people that add pumps to engines that have 200,000 miles on them that are, getting worn out, they'll tend to go more towards the 22 degrees of timing. The other big difference is starting in cold weather. It gets harder the more you advance it. So a lot of people up north in colder climates will retard the timing a bit. With the 24 degrees on a freshly rebuilt engine, I noticed it started fine in warm weather. It was more challenging to start in the winter. It nailed really hard, like it actually hurt my ears when it was idling and warming up. Once it got up to operating temperature, it was fine. I didn't hear nailing anymore. It responded awesome. But every morning going out, starting in the cold, that thing just, it didn't sound right. Dieselmeken informs me that despite that nailing that you hear, your engine will be fine. It's really how much you can stand to listen to. So if this is a family vehicle or a daily commuter and you don't want that obnoxious sound, you're better off retarding it a little bit. Obviously, you're going to get the most performance the more you advance it. I would recommend installing the pump in the middle of the slot on the engine at 23 degrees before top dead center, and that gives you the ability to adjust it up to 24 or down to 22 if you're not satisfied with how it's performing once you get it up and running. Now that we're ready to install the pump in the engine, in the truck, unhook our battery first. Then we're going to come down here and set our timing. I'm shooting for 23 degrees before top dead center. So the line that goes between the 2 and the 0 is 20. And then you can see a line between the 0 of 20 and the 3 of 30. That's 25. So we're back right around 23. And again, make sure that you pull the oil fill cap off. Make sure both lobes are facing upwards so that you know you're not 180 degrees out of timing. Next, we're going to come over to our injection pump, and we're going to line up this groove with this mark. Now, as long as this mark lines up with this screw, you should be okay. If this mark doesn't line up to this screw, this little groove here might be 3 teeth off. You need to make sure your sealing surface is clean on the block, and we'll go ahead and install a new gasket. So now we've installed our new gasket. I've taken our coupler out. I'll slide that over the injection pump. Another thing is you'll want to have everything removed off the block over here so that you can slide the pump straight on. So there, our pump's on. We'll go ahead and install our nuts on the 3 studs coming out of the block for the injection pump. And the factory service manual doesn't give us a torque value. It just says to tighten these nuts and the rear bolt. So just to be safe, I'm applying Loctite, because the last thing you want to have happen is to have your injection pump loosen up and lose your timing. So as far as tightening sequence goes, I like to start with the nut between the pump and the block because it's hardest to get to, and I like to try to tighten the front 3 bolts a little at a time to pull that pump on straight. But when you go to final tighten, start with the one between the pump and the block, and then finish up with these 2 here on the outside, and that's going to give you a minimal chance of distorting that gasket and having a leak. Next thing I'm going to do is take my bolts for my backside bracket and apply some Loctite on there, and hold my bracket up, bolt that on. It's a lot easier to install the pump without that bracket in there. With that bracket installed, I'll take the bolt that threads in the back of the injection pump, apply Loctite to it, and we'll thread that in for our pump. The last step is to fill the pump up with oil, which is required anytime you're putting a fresh pump on the engine. This bolt has a copper crush washer. It takes a 19mm socket to remove it, and you're going to install approximately 0.4 liters of oil through this hole to prime the injection pump. Then we'll reinstall our bolt and tighten it, and then we'll move on to installing all of our lines and our injection pump lines. So for those of you that have a stretch timing chain and you want to bring your timing back to spec, or for those of you with a stock injection pump that want a little better performance, that's when you would use the drip timing method. And to do that, all you have to do is loosen the 3 nuts on the front of the pump, the 1 bolt on the back. Obviously remove your lines, and most importantly, make sure it's loose enough that you don't destroy the gasket between the pump and the block. Now for the guys with the timing chain stretch and you want to bring it back to factory, bring it back to 24 degrees. And if you're looking to get the most performance with the stock pump, 26 degrees before top dead center is the magic number, and it's not recommended to go any further past that. When it comes to drip timing the engine, first you'll have to remove the injector lines, and then we'll start to disassemble on the injection pump. This part takes a 15mm to remove. Then you'll have this spring that goes in here like this, And then this slides in there like that. Take these two parts out. We will thread this back into our pump. Go ahead and take your 15mm and snug that up. Next, we'll take our drip timing tool and install that. We want the nozzle to point towards the valve cover. So it's pointed right towards the valve cover like that. Next thing we're going to do is wire our throttle all the way open. Now this is a project definitely easier if you have two sets of hands instead of one, because you really need the throttle all the way up against the throttle stop. So if your linkage, let's say I just wired this open, there's still a gap there. So with my left hand I'm holding the throttle all the way forward, and I'm going to come down with my right finger here. I can still move it. So holding that there, then you're going to go ahead and press your primer pump, which is that guy right there. Once you have it set, once the pump's set in agreement with the timing mark on the crankshaft, you'll get about 1 drip per second. It's pretty much all or nothing. It'll either spew out or nothing will come out. So don't get too worked up about the 1 drop per second. And another point, when installing the pump after you've removed it, if you line up the mark on the front of the pump with the little groove in the sprocket, and you slide the pump in, and the pump just slides right into the engine. You don't have to wiggle the pump to get it to slide in, and you have the mark on the crankshaft lined up where you want it. It should be timed where you want it. Now, if you go to put the pump in and you have to wiggle it a little bit to get it in, because let's say you're a half tooth off, that's when you're going to want to drip time it to get it perfectly set where you want it. For those of you that live in a smog state that don't want to delete the ALDA, you might just want to adjust it for maximum performance. And for those of you with a diesel mechan pump, you're definitely going to want to take advantage of adjusting the ALDA. To do it, it's super simple. There's a 10mm locking nut on top, which you'll loosen. And to enrich the fuel, you spin it counterclockwise to bring the screw out. Now for a stock injection pump and you're trying to maximize the fuel with the ALDA, most people back it all the way out. Some of them will turn it 1/8 to 1/4 of a turn back in. And with the diesel mechan pump, it really depends on your turbo. So back it out until it starts to just give you a little haze of smoke off idle, and that's about where your best performance should be. Once you're done adjusting, hold the screwdriver with one hand and tighten the locking nut with the other, and it's literally as simple as that.